This recording is made November 10th, 2003 with Wilfred Brenton Bahr. The last name is spelled B-A-H-R. Bill resides at 1012 Main Street in Petersburg, Indiana. He is a native of Detroit, Michigan. Served in the United States Army, initially in the 1256th Engineer Combat Battalion. He retired as a major after 33 years of service in the military, most of which was in the reserves. He initially entered the military on 4/21/1944 and was discharged on May 30th, 1946. He then served in the Korean conflict from 1950 to 1953. He has a total of 5 years in active duty, 15 active reserve, and 13 years inactive reserve. This recording is made with Larry Ordner, Regional Director for U.S. Senator Dick Lugar. Bill, thanks for being part of the Veterans History Project.
I'm very pleased to be able to do this.
Well, thank you. Well, tell me now, you were 18 years old, and where were you living at that time?
Right here, 1012 Main Street, Petersburg, Indiana.
Well, and I guess Petersburg was just like every other town, and certainly in Indiana across the nation. A lot of guys were going in the military at that time, weren't they?
As soon as they were 18 years of age, on a bus they went, or away they went to boot camp or training camp.
And patriotism, like in Petersburg, was very high.
Very high.
That's right. Everybody was
absolutely. Everybody was behind the war effort.
Well, you were drafted.
That's correct.
What was the reaction at home when the draft notice came?
Well, I don't really remember. It had been expected for a long time, and it was not much of a surprise.
Mm-hmm. But you had graduated from school.
I'd graduated from high school.
What were you doing at the time in Petersburg?
Well, in anticipation of being drafted, I really wasn't doing anything at that moment because I expected to be drafted.
Okay.
But I'd gone away to school at Purdue after I finished high school the previous May and got a couple of semesters up there. And my last time at Purdue was in January of 1944.
Well, where did you go for induction, Bill?
I went to Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis, Indiana.
And then you had boot training.
I was sent.
Basic training.
They assigned me because of the training I'd had at Purdue in the engineering program there to the combat engineers, probably. But I was assigned to the combat engineers.
Did you have basic traight?
We took basic training
where was
at Camp McCain, Mississippi, which is 90 miles south of Memphis.
What was it like adjusting to Army life?
It was quite different. It was just different. It was completely new for me, and the unit was made up of people who came mostly from northeastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania, out of the steel mills, out of the factories, out of the coal mines. We had a lot of different races, not races, but nationalities of people, Polish, Italian, Slavics, and just about anything you could mention.
So it was a real melting pot of people.
It was, and it was a melting pot of ages, too, because at that time in 1945, many of the younger people in their 20s had already been drafted or enlisted and were in service. And they worked, the induction people worked their way up to the older ages, and we were with people who were 38 years old and people who were just turning 18. Those were the people that filled our organization.
So you had quite a wide range of people, and this is probably for you the first time you had associations with a lot of people outside of Indiana.
That's correct.
Places, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And that's certainly a learning experience.
Yeah, we lived in Akron, and I didn't come from Detroit, but my father lived and worked there, and other than that, we really hadn't been out of the area.
When you think back to basic training, what kind of instances pop in your mind?
Well, it was a lot of hard work. The first incident pops into my mind when we got off the troop train at 11 o'clock, 1100 hours, at Camp McCain, Mississippi. A big, tall sergeant from Texas with stripes up and down his arm said, "Can anyone here type?" And I thought that would be a good opportunity for a nice assignment, so I raised my hand and I could type. Well, they sent me to the mess hall, and I had KP from 11 o'clock or thereabouts until midnight, and the last job I had in the kitchen was wiping things off the rafters. And finally I was able to find where I was supposed to sleep, but I had no equipment, no bedding, and by the time I actually got in bed it was quite late, and I didn't have any idea that there would be a duty roster anywhere. And I thought surely since I'd worked so hard in the kitchen that I'd be able to sleep in the next day. And it didn't work that way. Somebody was after me quite early in the morning wanting to know why I wasn't back down in the kitchen, because my name starting with BA was on the duty roster for KP that day. So I thought that might not be too fair, but it was done. We did what we were told, and we learned to do that.
Mm-hmm. How physically demanding was it?
Very physically demanding. We had physical activity every day, calisthenics every day, marching every day, work in the field every day. The sun was bearing down, very hot. We'd go out, our shirts would be soaking wet with sweat, and we'd march back, then they'd start to dry. And you could see all these men with shirts that were white, actually white from sweat. That'll give you some idea how hard it was. No air conditioning, and Grenada, Mississippi, Camp McCain, Mississippi is was and probably still is a very hot place.
Do you feel like your basic training reflected wartime?
I think so, because everybody was interested in what was happening in the war. And we did watch the news, and they had programs where they would tell us what was going on. And I don't recall the name for this, but they did keep us informed. Everybody was interested in what was happening.
Well, after basic, what was your
we had
assignment?
Advanced training, and then we were sent to Camp Polk to prepare us with final training for the unit prior to shipment overseas.
What kind of things did you train on?
Well,
infantry training?
Yeah, we had infantry training. We were trained to fight as infantry soldiers, but the engineer soldier is trained in demolitions, construction, bridge building, road building, all kinds of carpentry, pioneer work. We had a pioneer tool chest and a carpenter tool chest, each squad, which we took very good care of, and we knew how to use these things. And the older people in the organization were quite good at just working, and we learned a lot from them, and they taught us how to work hard. They were hard-working people.
After that period of training, did you then have a first assignment? What was that?
Well, we went overseas
Oh.
in September.
So did you have any time off before you?
Yeah,
Okay.
I got a little time off to come home, and that photograph was taken when I was home on leave before we left for Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, which was near the New York port of embarkation. And the unit went there as a unit. We were lean, we were mean. Those men were in excellent physical condition.
What was it like just even getting to go there? That had to be kind of exciting.
It was exciting. At Camp is now Fort Polk. We had the infiltration course that we took, and a couple other training courses before we left for New York City, Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. And then we had the gas chamber that we took in Camp Kilmer to get us familiar with using a gas mask in case we had a chemical attack.
I guess you probably just assumed you were going to be going overseas, didn't you?
Yes, because most people actually went overseas, and it was a kind of a badge of merit to be able to go overseas, to make that kind of a contribution.
When you came home before that deployment, were there any words of advice given you?
I don't recall any. I really don't. I just don't remember.
Yeah. How'd you get to Europe? What kind of ship were you on?
We were on an English cruise ship that held about 5,000 people. And we were packed in there like sardines.
What kind of passage did you have? How was it?
Well, we were in a convoy, and at that time the submarines were busy, the German submarines.
So you zigged and zagged?
We zigged and zagged, and it took us about 5 weeks to get to England.
Long passage.
A long time.
Were you able to eat much?
Oh yeah, and the food was good.
Had any problem with seasickness?
I didn't. I never did have any
you're
problems
lucky.
with seasickness, but many did have problems with seasickness. That's quite a sight to see that many people on board a troop ship.
Yeah. Did you sleep in hammocks and that kind of thing?
We had bunk beds, and they were steel rectangles with canvas in between the steel, and you barely had enough room below and above you to turn over.
What was that sight like of a convoy?
Amazing. Just amazing to see all those ships.
Describe it to me, what you saw out there.
Ships in every direction. All kinds of ships. We didn't know what they were, but they were out there, and we knew that we had protection from Navy vessels that were combat vessels.
Where'd you land?
We landed in Southampton, and I remember seeing pictures of troops getting off troop ships in Southampton. And at that time it was cold, and or at least we wore our overcoats, and we carried everything we had, and we walked off that troop ship in a line of file, one right after another. And
now at that time England was still under attack, was it not?
yes, they were.
So did you have like at Southampton, was there like just kind of like a holding base for you at that time for a while?
Well, it didn't take very long for us to get from Southampton to Tiverton, England, where we were stationed.
I said blackout conditions, right?
Yeah, blackout conditions, absolutely. I remember that. And we were near the moors in southwest England. And we were there September, October, November, about 3 months.
What did you do during that period?
We trained. We did exercises in the field. We'd march out. We'd do all kinds of engineer training, infantry training.
Did you feel like during that time you were just waiting for the word?
Yeah, sure. We want to know where we were going, you know. And it was especially difficult right after the Battle of the Bulge began in December, that everybody was very sensitive about needing all the people they could get over there, so we had infantry training on the moors in the snow, and it was cold. They crawling in the snow with your rifle, all your gear on. It wasn't a lot of fun, and it was so cold that when they'd bring coffee to you for a break, which didn't happen very often, before you could finish drinking it all, it would freeze. I remember we used to build a lot of bridges, Bailey bridges, with the transoms, the panels, and we had training with that continually. We'd go to a bridge site, throw up a bridge across the river, build a bridge. And one great moment was when the Red Cross came with donuts and coffee, which was a rarity.
I guess by the nature of your duties in that assignment, you would precede, in many cases, infantry, wouldn't you?
Yes, absolutely.
What did that do for the? Excuse me for saying this, but that had to put you in some very dangerous situations, didn't it?
Actually, we were quite lucky. We were in some dangerous situations, and it could have been a lot worse. But we were actually very fortunate that we didn't really suffer a great deal from enemy action.
So you were finally, you finally did cross the channel.
We did. We crossed from England to Le Havre, France, which was a major port of entry, and it looked like the pictures that you may have seen of how France, the beaches looked at that time. Quite an interesting sight. And we moved through France, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, England. We were at one of the Lucky Strike camps for a while, and eventually moved through the German industrial section around Aachen and Cologne, places like that. And our first big assignment there was to build a bridge across the Rhine for the American 9th and British Second Armies, so that they could continue their attacks eastward.
I guess your units were so you really moved quickly, didn't you?
We did move quickly. We were in many different places, and we saw the ravages of war everywhere we went.
What kind of images pop in your mind?
Well, one place was as we began our work on the bridge across the Rhine River at Wesel, Germany. The fixed bridges had been blown by the Germans, and other troops, engineer troops, had already put up pontoon bridges. And our purpose was to build a fixed bridge across the Rhine River, which we did.
How'd you manage materials?
They got material wherever it was and wherever they could get it. And I really don't know. I wasn't the person that made the procurement of that material, but they requisitioned a lot of it from the people,
Really?
the German people, wherever they could get it. For the bridges, we used piling, which are like telephone poles, and those were driven into the riverbed, and then we constructed our bridges on top of these pilings. There was, you asked a question, did we see anything there? Yeah, there was a pillbox with 3 dead people in it, and I remember seeing that, and that made quite an impression on me.
Was that the first time you had encountered?
Yeah, that's the first time I'd encountered any.
What did that do to you?
Well, of course, the odor is something you'll never forget, and it's as bad as anything I've ever had the opportunity or the occasion to witness. But you look at these people and you say, why? You know, why did they have to die? What kind of people were they? What did they do? And even though they were Germans, and that was my reaction. You know, I'm not too much for wanting to see anybody have to give up their life.
Did it cross your mind that I take it your ancestry is German?
Yes.
Did it cross your mind? What for folks with German heritage, despite their intense hatred of the Nazi regime, still there had to be a lot of sadness for what was happening to Germany, wasn't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And now that I've learned a little more about the history of Germany and why things were done the way they were done, it's a little easier to understand that their system would not permit the control and the prevention of this kind of thing like ours would. The top person in Germany had more or less veto authority over about everything that the legislative group did. I don't remember the mechanics, the names of these things that are involved here, but I know that was true.
Mm-hmm. So you basically you went. How many projects might you have worked on during that period?
Well, we had some road projects, and we later used prisoners for some of these
Really?
hard road projects.
What was that experience like?
You go out and you dig holes in the road, and you fill them up with rocks and asphalt, and it's just hard work.
But I suppose that for the prisoners, they were probably being treated very nicely.
They were, and I remember going out with 40, 50 German prisoners by myself with my M1 on a road job, and no other security, and they didn't leave. And I thought, you know, they could put me down anytime, but it never happened. And I felt, as you said, that probably they wanted to eat, and probably they were fed quite well as American prisoners.
Did you ever encounter times where I guess, how did German people regard what they were living under at that time? Did anybody ever express openness? I know there was a language barrier, but did you ever sense that?
Well, we did have occasion to talk with these people, and to me that was something interesting to do and informative. And they did talk, but mostly what they were concerned with was the lack of food, the lack of comfort, the lack of heat, and the misery of the times. And of course, none of them were Nazis, and most would quickly tell you that they had nothing to do with the Nazi Party. But as far as ridiculing or talking down about their government, they just didn't seem to do that so much. Mm-hmm. It was their pain and misery of the time. Mm-hmm. Given that most of the men were gone, dead, in prison somewhere, missing, still in the service, it was a very, very difficult place.
Where were you when the war ended in Europe?
When our war in Germany ended, we built one more bridge over the Weser River, and then shortly thereafter, they decided that the war ended in Europe, May the 8th, I think, or early May of 1945, and our unit was destined to go to the Pacific, so they shipped us, and we had trucks, and we got in our trucks, packed our gear, we went to Marseille, France, at a large staging area there, and we were supposed to go to the Pacific.
How do you
Because-
feel about that?
Well, we thought that if you had to go, you had to go, but you know, you just knew that if you were supposed to go someplace and you had orders to do something, you did it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were prepared to do that.
I've heard lots of men say that it's just astonishing to think what many of them went through in Europe, and then were possibly going to be faced with going be part of an invasion force,
Mm-hmm.
and that would have been probably the ugliest invasion force, the ugliest situation they could have possibly been put in, wouldn't it?
Yes.
That would have been terrible.
Yes,
wouldn't
it would have been. Of course, we were down there. Here's August, here's September. Then the atomic bombs were dropped in Japan, and the war soon ended there.
Do you
So it
think
was
people
over.
comprehended what the magnitude of what happened?
I have a feeling that they probably did, especially when it was announced the war was
Do you
over.
remember where you were when you heard that news?
Somewhere in our tent in Marseille, in the staging area,
Wow,
with my gear laid out for inspection. You know,
I'll be darned.
VJ Day. It was VE Day in Europe, and then VJ Day.
Now, did you stay in Europe for a while?
Yes, they sent the married people back who had points,
Uh-huh.
and those who had more service. We had a point system.
And I would think doing what you were doing, you were quickly put into rebuilding.
Oh yeah,
roads and
absolutely.
things.
I was the low point single guy, and I went back to Germany for another year there in the Army of Occupation.
What was the occupation force like for you?
Well, for me, we went to Bremerhaven, Germany, and with a different unit, the 355th Engineer General Service Regiment, and their mission was to take a German military barracks and convert that for the shipment of returning American servicemen back to the United States, a staging area.
Wow. I meant to ask you, were you involved in any way with maybe liberating of any of the camps?
Well, we were in Erfurt, Germany, stationed there before we left to go to Marseille for shipment to Japan. And that is not far from Weimar, Germany, which is also near Buchenwald. And we were taken to Buchenwald to see this concentration camp before it was completely vacated. There were still prisoners there. And yes, we saw that, and that was something that won't be forgotten ever. And it was as people describe it when you see it on TV. And we talked to some of the prisoners that were there.
Really?
And for an 18-year-old, that's quite impressive.
I'm sure it is.
So many of the things I understand and believe today have been the result of things that I have experienced and seen during the war. Our people came off the farms and through the Depression, and we didn't have much, so I think we had a pretty good core of people at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Dedicated,
It
hardworking.
develops your thinking, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it really does. It really does.
So after the war, did you come home to Petersburg?
Yes, discharged at Camp Atterbury. Started to walk out. The sergeant said, "You better stay in the reserve because if you're recalled, you'll have to go back in as a buck private again." And I was a sergeant by that time, so I signed up for the reserve. But they had the GI Bill, and I went to Evansville College. Almost tried to say the University of Evansville, but at that time it was Evansville College, and I spent 4 years there under the GI Bill and got a degree in physics. Then I was off in a career in electronics. Great thing, the GI Bill.
Did you think when you were an 18-year-old what your career would be? I mean, you can almost thank the military in a way for opening that door for you, did it not?
I think so. Yes, I was able to see things there that I didn't know before.
Your world became a lot bigger.
Yes, it really did. It really did. And that's such a value for anyone to be able to see more than just what's in your town.
So, you came home to Petersburg for a while.
That's right.
And,
Came home in May, late May, and had the summer to play. And then in September, I was in school. at Evansville.
And we had some years of peace at that time, didn't we?
We did.
Post-war.
We did.
And then things started heating up in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that one coming?
No, it was like a bolt of lightning. Just never even thought anything like that could occur.
And so really so soon, wasn't it?
Yes.
And people were probably hoping we wouldn't have to be actively involved, I suppose.
No, they'd had enough.
Yeah.
But those in the reserve were mostly recalled for the Korean conflict.
What was it like for family?
Oh, it was
Seeing
tough
that?
to be separated. I was married then. I was married in 1947, and I had 2 children, and I had a notice to report in September, on 20th September, and I went first to...
Did you have second thoughts about that time, about that sergeant who persuaded you to sign up?
Yeah, I would have preferred to have stayed home, but at least I was able to finish my my program at Evansville in the spring of 1950. So back in we went, and we left home, and we left the wife and the kids. And
how old were you at that time?
At that time, I would have been about 24. That was tough. If you see these people leaving now, you know, and you think, oh my, they're leaving. Well, they'll be back, but there's more to it than that. Leaving a family is a very difficult thing to have to do,
Completely different, isn't it?
especially if you don't know if and when or if you're ever going to come back.
That had to be completely different than
That was
leaving for
tough.
World War II.
That was tough. Going in single is not as tough as going in when you're leaving
And
the
I'm sure you
family.
had a whole other set of worries, didn't you?
Oh yeah,
Going with you.
oh yeah. We'd bought a house in Bloomington, had a job up there, television factory.
Can't imagine what that feel like.
Don't want to do that again.
How'd you get to Korea?
Well, I didn't go to Korea.
Oh,
I
you
stayed in the
didn't?
United
Oh,
States.
I see.
I would have gone to Korea, but because my training was in electronics, I had asked for a transfer into something in the electronics field.
Oh, I see.
So I was one of 8 people in Colonel Tom Tandy's Engineer General Service Regiment that went to Korea that was transferred out, and I went to the Signal Corps Engineering Labs in New Jersey.
Should I know that name, Tandy, from the electronics?
Might be some relationship
Okay.
there, but
I was wondering.
they were strictly a construction
Okay,
battalion.
all right.
And so at that time I was at Fort Riley for a while, then Camp Carson, which is where the Colonel Tandy's unit was. And they were made up of reserve units that were recalled for the Korean conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And
And you were in for really about 3 years, weren't you?
yeah, and I had been boarded for my commission before I left for Korea, before I was recalled in September, and filled out some papers. The government had a program, the Army had a program. If you were a World War II soldier or service person and you had a college degree, you could apply for a direct commission, which I did. And that eventually came through the next spring. After I'd been on active duty again, I was back in service as an enlisted person. So I applied for 2 years of active duty, which I couldn't get until I ended my term of service as an enlisted person. So finally, when I got to Fort Monmouth and I was working in the Signal Corps Engineering Labs, the Army decided that they were ready to discharge me, but the next day they recalled me for 2 more years of active duty as a second lieutenant in the Signal Corps. And that was a totally different experience. And we worked with young men in signal units in the Southwestern Signal Corps Training Center at Morro Bay, California, near San Luis Obispo. And that was a very, very rewarding experience when compared with the enlisted service.
Mm-hmm. But your work in civilian life had really kind of destined, I guess, what kind of area you would be working in.
I felt
right?
comfortable, and I felt pleased to be able to work in my field, which was electronics. And I've made my living electronics.
Mm-hmm.
television, radio.
Did your family stay here in Petersburg?
Uh,
Did they join you at any time?
well, my family joined me about 6 weeks after I was recalled in 1950. And we lived in a small 2-room motel-type place with a little burner plate and a very small refrigerator. But we liked it. We were very happy out there. We made it. She drove out there, and the radiator blew up on the way. Here she is with 2 kids. And we stayed together from that time on for the rest of the 2.5 years. We were together at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and then together out in California. And they sent me back to Fort Monmouth for advanced training, basic officers training, and then back to California with the unit. That was a good duty. It was very good duty. We had good relationships, and we felt like we were doing something worthwhile.
Absolutely. Well, you had a long and very distinguished career in the reserves that continued on. And what was it that made you feel committed to staying in the reserves for so long?
Well, that's a good question. It's hard to answer. It's really hard to answer.
But you had somehow this notion of duty to country.
We all had at that time a very strong feeling toward our country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that exists quite in the same degree or content today. I'm not sure about that. We didn't take much for granted. We were lucky to have our country and our freedom here, and we were willing to protect it, and we were proud of being an American, and of course we still are. But I think the feeling was a little bit stronger then.
Mm-hmm.
I was just proud to be an American, and I felt that I had a duty to be a citizen and a responsibility that went along with it.
You think that...
I was proud of what I did.
Yeah. But those are probably things that have carried you in life too, aren't they?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they're transferable, translatable.
But I guess what I'm saying is that by serving country, you come home and then you serve your community and you get involved things in leadership roles. It probably instilled that notion of service in many ways, didn't it?
I think so. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think military training, universal military training, is not a bad concept. We don't do that in this country, but maybe it's not a bad thing for us to do. For that reason.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you would tell future generations about the importance of military service?
It's a responsibility, it's a duty. Freedom is earned, and it has to be protected. It has to be kept. It's not a gift without a price.
Mm-hmm.
Speak up, get involved in the political system. Political system is not perfect, and probably it may need a little tailoring.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any final thoughts you want to add?
Just be responsible, care for others. Don't give the appearance of any manipulation of other people. Do what you're supposed to.
For the record, I want to note that after you were really in between active duty and reserves, you were in a total of 33 years.
That's correct.
And you left the military then as with the rank of major.
That's correct.
You have to be very proud of that. And I'm sure your family's very proud.
I am.
Thanks so much for doing this interview.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope I haven't made it sound too lofty.
You haven't. You haven't. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.